Ahoy there, folks! I'm Captain Benzie, and today I've undocked and come planetside here to Chaos Cards in Folkestone, where these wonderful folks have lent me use of their back room so that I can introduce to you Eve, War for New Eden, a brand new area control wargame set in the universe of EVE Online, published by Titan Forge Games. In EVE War for New Eden, players are going to be exploring this wonderful sector of space in front of them, exploiting the resources that they reveal, expanding their empire, and then giving each other a darn good kick in the face. If you're familiar with EVE Online, I'm here to show you why this board game is fantastic and jam-packed with some of the coolest space miniatures I've seen in a long time. And if you're not familiar with EVE Online, I'm here to tell you why this game is still absolutely fantastic. Now, there naturally is quite a lot to cover in this, so I think it's probably best that we just jump straight in. Despite the perhaps daunting size of EVE War for New Eden, setup for the game is actually remarkably straightforward. First of all, you construct the area of space that you're all going to be exploring and fighting over. This is done by using these helpful border cards that contain a load of information that you'll be using throughout the game. It's then filled in with numbered tiles, 1 to 3, which represent the quality of the systems you're going to be fighting over, and there's a simple layout in the rulebook that will show you how to do this. Each player is then given all of their resources. This will be a player board, their fleet of really cool ships, and several decks of cards. First of all, you have all of the cards that represent the different ships that you can be building and flying through New Eden. We then have a strategy deck, which we'll be using in combat, and a load of research development cards that allow you to build a small engine that will allow you to do various different things throughout the game. There are then all these tokens available off to the side for things like claiming systems and exhausting your fleets, and your player board is set up with action cubes and your basic income. From here, it's also important to make sure that the dice, all of the resources, and then the mission and event cards are in easy reach of all players. Every player has basically the same setup to begin with, but things very quickly become very personal. You see, when you start your setup, you choose 4 research cards to start developing. These are going to be the first major choice that you make in the game and allow you to choose the direction that you will be building your empire. Do you want to go full-on combat? If so, start looking at some of the upgrades like to your tech tree and whether or not you can build medium and large hulls. Do you want to start an industry machine? Then perhaps having the ability to extract more resources or take more actions might be more your thing. Each player is then given 2 starting frigates, an explorer and an interceptor, as detailed in the rulebook. This will be your very first fleet in the game. You can choose which of your home systems to set them up in. Each player then chooses which resource they have access to at the beginning of the game. Your home system has access to Tritanium, useful for building small ships, Mexilon, useful for building medium ships, and Pyrite, useful for building stations and structures. At the start of the game, players must choose 2 of these to block off with these markers, deciding what you're going to have early access to in the game. Don't worry though, you can unlock these very early on if you need to. With these decisions made, the player with the oldest EVE Online account goes first. Of course, you can choose whatever random version of who goes first you wish to decide with. The order of play in EVE War for New Eden is very fast-paced. Players take it in turns to perform a single action as detailed on their action board, taking one of the cubes and placing it in whichever action slot they wish to perform. They then perform the action and pass the turn to the player to the left. This then proceeds as everyone takes their actions until someone decides to pass, whether they're out of action cubes or just don't wish to perform anymore. Once all players have passed, the end phase begins and you move on to a new turn. The first player token passes to the left and the gameplay resumes from there. Players initially have access to 3 free actions, then can spend ISK to unlock additional actions for that turn. You take an action cube, you place it where you want it, and then you perform the action. In this case, by using a move action, I'm going to activate this fleet and move it into this system here. I would therefore flip the tile over, move the fleet into position, add a fleet exhausted token, and then perform whatever actions may be available on the tile. In this case, there's nothing to worry about, so that's my move action done. Quick and easy, right? Sometimes when exploring, you flip over a tile that has discovery tokens on it. When this happens, take note of how many tokens you need. Players then go to this bag, take out that many tokens, and gain the resources shown. In this case, 2 minerals of their choice, and 1 amount of planetary resources. These are just collected simply from the resource pool here. So we're going to take these 2 minerals and we're going to take a planetary token. And this is where the different types of ship come into play. Here, this Anathema, being an exploration frigate, gets the bonus that when it uncovers a discovery token, it takes an additional one and gets to choose. So this time, we would come to the bag, choose 2 random tokens. In this case, I've got a claim marker or planetary industry. Now, I've got very little use for the planetary industry at this point in the game, so instead, I'm going to take a claim token and claim that system in the name of the Amarian Empire. Claiming is normally an action. Here, the Galente Empire have uncovered a couple of systems that they think they'd quite like to add to the fold. Therefore, they perform the claim action and place one of these tokens to show that that now belongs to the Federation. In addition to moving and claiming, players can of course manufacture and trade as well. When either of these actions are performed, they look across to this part of the board here. A manufacture action allows you to perform 3 manufacturing operations. You look at this list of items here, decide which you want to manufacture, and you simply pay the cost. So if you wanted to make here some structure components, you can spend 2 Mexilon to do so. If you fancy getting some moon goo, you can spend 2 Tritanium. You can even manufacture victory points, allowing players to essentially win War of New Eden by manufacturing their way to victory. Trade works in a very similar way. Again, a trade action gives you 3 trade operations, where you can buy and sell different resources based on their values here. The build action works in a similar way. When a build action is performed, you earn a number of build points as shown on the board, plus any bonuses you may have from research developments. We then look at the build section of the board edge. You can see that the Minmatar player had 6 build points, of which they can spend building different things. Here you can see that each of the structures costs 5 build points in order to build. Small ships only cost 1, medium ships cost 3, and large ships cost 5. There are, of course, other resources as well, so even if this Minmatar player would like to build himself a customs office, and indeed has the 4 risk required to do so, we don't have the resource cards for it. Therefore, by performing a build action, I can instead spend the Tritanium and the 4 risk, as shown here on the board, to instead construct a saber, adding it into any of my home systems, ready to head out to war. Then there's the research action. Throughout your playtime of War for New Eden, you'll be earning research points. These are earned at the end of each round. They can even be manufactured. And when you earn these tokens, you place them onto your research and development cards. During your turn, when one of these cards has enough tokens to fully develop it, you can reveal it. In this case, the star map required 2 research tokens, so I can now reveal that and add that development to my action row down here, which I can then use whenever I wish. This empty space does not automatically refill, and so you can use the research action here to add up to 4 new development cards to your development area. And this is one of my favourite things about War for New Eden. Though there are a lot of different actions you can perform, early on in the game, only a handful of these actually make any form of sense. In your first turn, you're probably going to be moving. You're also probably going to be claiming. You might do a manufacture or a trade if your movement and your discovery tokens are fortunate enough to give you the resources for it. You may even just be lucky enough to perform a build action. This is a natural scaling mechanic that I really enjoy, and it makes teaching the game very simple because you're not overwhelmed with actions in your early turn. There's very little action paralysis of, oh, what do I do? There are so many options. Because there are limited options early on, gameplay flows very quickly and introduces new mechanics as the game proceeds. And we haven't even talked about the mission or event cards yet. Players will start with 1 each of these, they can manufacture them, and they can earn more through things like discovery tokens. Event cards are special cards that allow you to do different actions, breaking the turn sequence. They could be things like a mining crew that allow you access to different minerals, allowing you to quickly gather some of those, things like gate camps that allow you to steal from other players, wormholes that allow you to move across the board, risking your ships in the process, or even adding a rookie pilot to your fleet, just allowing you to quickly build a frigate and send it out into the fray. Mission cards, on the other hand, are one of your primary ways of earning victory points in EVE War for New Eden. Again, each player starts with one of these, and they can either be manufactured, or you can use that wonderful star map card that we saw earlier to draw new mission cards. These can be all kinds of things, from Old Grudge inciting you into combat against other players just to prove a point, or things like Market Breaker and Care Bear giving you victory points for things like gaining a certain amount of ISK or holding so many minerals in your hand. The mission cards you draw, and when you draw them, can also help direct your gameplay. If you were to draw Old Grudge early on, you'd probably want to take a more militaristic approach, amassing a fleet and beginning to harass your neighbours. Whereas if you were to get something like Care Bear early on, you're probably going to want to explore and find systems with multiple asteroid belts, claim those, and start harvesting resources. This also twins in with the research mechanic, as it will help you decide which research cards you want to actually develop in order to amass the most victory points. And victory points are of course the name of the game. You see, the aim of War for New Eden is to be the first person to reach 10 victory points, triggering the Verge of Ascendancy. Once a player has triggered the Verge of Ascendancy because they've got 10 victory points already, you play one final turn where everyone tries to scramble to end with the most victory points. Whether that's through manufacturing victory points, earning them through combat, or through your various mission and objective cards, whatever you need to win. That final turn becomes a mad scramble, and some really crazy stuff can happen. I just love the fact that early on in the game there are so many different possibilities for how to earn those victory points. Do you want to build and manufacture? Do you want to hoard ISK for that Market Breaker card? Do you want to just start punching your opponents over and over again and earning victory points through that? Some of the mission cards include just having large ships on the board at the end of the turn. If you found that one early on, you may decide that you really want to build yourself some battleships as quickly as possible. You may not even use them, but just having them on the board will help you earn victory points through some of your development cards. This variety and versatility is a key part of this game, and it really represents the variety and versatility in EVE Online, where players can be industrialists, going out and harvesting resources, reprocessing those resources into ships and ammunition and things like that. You can go and be a combat pilot and just start shooting at your opponents. You can go and explore and find new areas of space to claim and build those developments. You can focus primarily on research and building an engine of quick action cards that allow you to do things out of sequence. Of course, you're fairly limited by the amount of actions you can take each turn, and even the ability to buy additional actions for 5 or 10 ISK, whilst very powerful later on in the game, can be circumvented by having research cards that allow you to just perform a single trade action or a single manufacturing action out of sequence. That means in your turn, you might take a move action, but while you're doing so, you're also harvesting resources or building other things as you go. And it's really hard to overstate how thematic that feels. As an EVE Online player, I'm really glad that Titanforge have taken the time and energy to sit there and actually work in all of these different playstyles into the board game. You're not just being rushed straight into combat to hit people over the face with whatever ships you happen to have in a fleet. Sometimes holding back and manufacturing your way to victory can be a really potent path. We've had games where we've played where someone builds a fleet early on and starts smacking around every other player. And they've lost because the person who's sat there quietly in the corner has just been amassing points through things like Market Breaker and Care Bear, and is just manufacturing victory points. And in the final turn, they've got so many minerals that they just convert and build and just manufacture a victory. There are some victory conditions we've not talked about yet. You see, as players are claiming systems, at the end of each round, if you have at least 5 claimed systems, not including your home system, you score a victory point. If you've got 5 systems and more than anyone else, you score an additional victory point. And if you're the lucky one who's holding the central position, that's another victory point during the end phase. That means if you've claimed more systems than anyone else, and you've got at least 5 of them, and you're holding the center, you're earning 3 victory points a turn. That is a very quick way to rush to victory, and players are going to need to keep an eye out for that to make sure that they're fighting over that central point and pushing each other off claims. Now, that's not to say that War for New Eden is hyper-aggressive. It's really not. There are other games in this genre that really encourage you just to ruin each other's days, and this doesn't. But it does ask that you just check over what your opponents are doing, keep an eye on them, and maybe just police around the board. And I have to say that both myself and my gaming group love a board game with this kind of decision making. It's not just a case of what is best for me. There are a lot of games that I've played where you can just look at the board, analyse the situation, and everything maths out to a perfect route. That never happens in War for New Eden, because there is so much going on with different players taking on different routes that you could sit there and go, right, well, I could manufacture this, I could explore that way, I could push this person back. There are always these decisions to be made, and every game that I've played so far, and we've played dozens, has felt completely unique and different. And of course, I can't believe we've got this far into the video without even talking about the ships. Now, the models that I have are of course from a prototype copy. A lot of folks have asked me, what is the quality like on these? Can I paint them? And the answer is simply, I don't know. These prototype models are absolutely beautiful and better quality than several other space board games that I own. But Titanforge themselves are renowned for amazing high quality miniatures, so I expect the release version will be even better than these. But what do the ships actually do in the game? Well, every ship has one of these beautifully illustrated cards, and I think we need to give a big shout out to Rix Javix here, not only for being one of the coolest pirates in EVE Online, but for coming up with some really cool artwork for the entire board game. Every ship has one of these cards, with numerous stats on it, plus some abilities at the bottom. Here we can see the stat line for this buzzard. Difficulty is how difficult the ship is to lock onto, and we'll talk more about that later. Attack is how many and what type of dice it rolls in combat if it's the leader. Support is how many dice it adds to the dice pool if it's a support ship. Reduction is how much damage it can take before it actually damages the ship directly. HP is how much damage the ship can take before it's destroyed, and speed is how fast it can move around the board. Ships then have these additional abilities at the bottom. Some of them are always active, like all of the explorers having this ability to draw additional discovery tokens, discarding any extras and keeping the ones that they want. Ones like this, however, need to be unlocked. This will unlock when you have Tech 1 defensive subsystems. Here on the Crow, these will be unlocked at Tech 1 utility subsystems, Tech 2 utility systems, and then of course as we come to some of the battleships, this one here, the Golem, requires us to have Tech 2 in both defensive and offensive subsystems. These abilities work through combat, they work through gameplay, and allow the ships their own unique feel. And as I said, whilst many of these abilities are shared across the 4 empires to keep things balanced, they do all have their own unique functions and abilities, which make them very thematic to the particular race chosen. Alright, well it's probably time then to talk about combat in War for New Eden. Here we can see that the Minmatar Republic have managed to claim a good number of different systems around the board, including the central tile. This is earning them a lot of victory points each turn, and the Amarr Empire player has decided he's had enough of that. He's amassed a fleet just to the side of the centre and has decided to take a move action to move this in to combat. At this point, the ships are removed from the board and combat begins. At the start of combat, players take a look through their remaining strategy cards, decide what they want to do in this particular fight. You always have access to the neutral formation, which adds no additional bonuses, but you can play things like a warp bubble to stop your opponents escaping, you can go for a pre-aligned retreat to make it easier for you to escape to safety, you can go for a fleet jump to allow you to move into additional sectors nearby, or, in this case, we're going to go for the Endless Barrage card. The Minmatar player reckons he's got a decent amount of firepower, and just a little bit of extra might be enough to push the Amarr Empire back. On the other side of the table, the Amarr Empire player looks through his strategy cards. He's noted that the Minmatar player has a Sleipnir battlecruiser, which is going to allow him to re-roll dice. The Amarr player knows he doesn't have any such support vessel, so instead he's looking at the Precise Trajectory card. At the start of combat, he gets to choose an orbit and may re-roll any number of dice in that orbit on their every attack. This might just be the additional punch required to kick that Minmatar player out of the center. So he plays that secretly, face down in front of him. Starting with the attacker, players must then assign ships to the 3 different orbits of small, medium, and large. The leader of each orbit must be a ship of that particular size. You cannot have a small ship leading a medium orbit or a medium ship leading a small orbit, for example. There must be at least one leader in the combat, but there don't have to be multiples. Now, the Amarr Empire player looks at his cards, specifically the Zealot. Since he has access to this Tech 2 offensive subsystem here, he's deciding to put the Zealot as the leader of the medium orbit. He also knows that the Zealot has 5 attack and only 1 support. On the other hand, the Curse, which could also be leader of the medium orbit, only has 4 attack but gives 2 support. Therefore, it makes sense for the Amarr player to put the Curse in support of that Zealot. At this point, the Amarr Empire player could decide to put the 2 of his maledictions into the small orbit in order to get a little bit of additional firepower. He looks across at the Minmatar side of the table and decides that yes, it could be the case that that Saber ends up being the leader of a small orbit, because he knows that a Saber adds no support to the fight, therefore it's probably going to be the leader of that small orbit. As such, the Amarr player takes one of his maledictions, assigns it as leader, and the other one as support in that small orbit. The Minmatar player then does the same on the other side. This time around, he's going to put the Vagabond at the front, because again, the Vagabond has a high attack value of rolling 5 dice, and the Sleipnir only rolls 4 dice as the leader, but 2 as support. Therefore, the Sleipnir is going to go into the medium orbit, the Saber is going to be leader of the small orbit, and he's going to add the Stiletto as support in the small orbit. Once the orbits have been assigned, each player then reveals their strategy card. At this point, the Amarr Empire player spots that endless barrage and understands that yes, that's going to be a fearsome amount of firepower. They have to assign each of these cards to the orbit, as mentioned on the card. So the Amarr Empire takes the precise trajectory and places that on his medium orbit to make sure that those ships are going to be re-rolling their dice. The Minmatar, again, takes the endless barrage and applies it to his medium orbit, ensuring additional dice are rolled for the Vagabond and the Sleipnir. Anyone who's played EVE Online can tell you that big ships don't automatically mean better ships. Small ships may not do much damage, but they can be incredibly hard to hit and can just harass larger vessels that struggle to shoot back at them. Medium ships, on the other hand, have a nice mix of both worlds, whereas large ships can struggle to lock onto and hit smaller vessels, but deal a fearsome amount of damage. In War for New Eden, this is represented by the type of dice. Small ships roll white dice, large ships roll black dice, and medium ships roll a mixture of the 2. The small dice have lots of these lock symbols, which make it very easy to lock on and hit other vessels, but they don't have much in the way of damage on them. The black dice, on the other hand, have a lot of damage symbols on them, but don't have much in the way of locking on, which means they can struggle to hit those smaller ships. This wonderful mechanic adds a lot of strategy and diversity and depth to combat in War for New Eden. Players now prepare their dice. Combat is done simultaneously, but starts at the small orbit and then works its way up the ranks towards the large. Anything that's destroyed during the small orbit is not available during the medium orbit, and anything destroyed by the time the medium orbit ends won't be available for the large orbit fight. So the Amarr player looks at his small orbit and he sees that he has a malediction leader and a malediction support. Looking down at the malediction card, he can see that the leader has 3 attack, so he grabs 3 dice. The support ship adds 1 dice to that fight. It's coloured yellow here to show that it adds 1 dice of whatever the orbit is. This means the malediction has 4 dice for its combat, and so the player rolls these, scoring 2 locks, a hit, and a crit. Now this critical symbol is always 1 damage, but can also add additional effects. For example, the Zealot here gets an additional lock result every time it rolls a crit. The malediction, on the other hand, doesn't have any crit effect. So we've got 2 locks and 2 damage. Is that enough to damage the saber that the malediction is firing at? Well, we look down at the saber card and discover that the saber has a difficulty rating of 3. This means these 2 lock symbols are not enough to actually lock onto the saber effectively, therefore the attack misses and the Amarr Empire has done nothing. It's now time for the saber to fire back, so we can see here that the saber has 4 white dice that it adds to the fight. We then have a single stiletto in support in this fight, and that adds an additional dice. Those 5 dice, not particularly effective either. He successfully rolled 2 locks and 1 critical effect. If we look down at the ships available, the crit does nothing other than that additional damage result. So we've rolled 2 locks and 2 damage. But the 2 locks isn't enough to lock onto the malediction, so again, unfortunately, nothing happens. This then takes us to the medium orbit, and again, starting with the Amarr Empire player, they look at how many dice are available. They have a Zealot in the leader position and a Curse following behind. The Zealot adds 5 attack to the orbit, and the Curse adds 2 support. That's 7 dice. Because these are split between white and black, that means we're going to have 3 white dice and 3 black dice. The additional 7th dice is whatever the player chooses to add to it. Now, the Amarr Empire player knows that he has precise trajectory placed on this orbit, allowing him to reroll. So he's going to add an additional black dice for the damage. He selects the enemy's Vagabond as his target ship and rolls the dice. This is a really nasty result. Looking at the Vagabond, we can see that the Vagabond has a difficulty value of 2. We have achieved the 2 lock symbols required to effectively lock on and hit the Vagabond. In addition to that, we have a total of 6 damage and a crit result. The crit result on the Zealot means an additional lock. That doesn't actually matter to us. We've already got the locks required to hit that Vagabond. As such, we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 damage hitting that Vagabond. The Vagabond has a reduction of 2, so 2 of that damage is removed and ignored, meaning 4 still passes through to the Vagabond itself. The Vagabond only has an HP of 3, therefore it is destroyed. But since combat happens simultaneously, it will get to fire back. The Minmatar player looks at his orbit for return fire, spots that he has a Vagabond, a Sleipnir, and the Endless Barrage card in this orbit. This means that the Vagabond is going to provide 5 dice to this attack. The Sleipnir is going to add 2 for its support value, for a total of 7. As before, this is a mix of black and white dice, so it'll be 3 and 3, split as evenly as possible, with the player getting to choose what they add as the additional. As they're going up against cruisers, the Minmatar player reckons, especially with the reroll that the Sleipnir is going to give him, adding an additional black dice would be a good option. The Endless Barrage card also means that he gets to add another dice of his choice into that attack. He chooses another black dice. That is a fearsome amount of firepower. Even though the Minmatar player has no access to any of these abilities yet, as he doesn't have Tech 2 offensive subsystems activated or Tech 2 defensive subsystems activated, that's still a lot of dice with rerolls from the Sleipnir. The Minmatar player rolls his dice and gets this wonderful result here. There's only 1 lock value on this though. That's not going to be enough to successfully lock onto the Zealot that the Minmatar player wants to destroy, because it has 2 difficulty. But we have a crit symbol here, and the Vagabond, a crit also means an additional hit. In this case, this crit supplies 1 hit, we've got another hit here, that matches the 2 difficulty of the Zealot. So therefore, we have enough hits to hit, followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 damage, plus 8 for the crit. The Vagabond has 2 reduction, so 2 of that is removed, leaving us now with a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 damage yet to apply. 3 of that is enough to destroy the Zealot. In this situation, if the Minmatar player had enough lock results to also hit the curse, that additional damage could be passed onwards. However, in this case, there are not enough hits to do this. The Zealot is going to be destroyed, and no additional damage sent forward. The medium combat ends with the Zealot being removed and the Vagabond being removed. The first round of combat has now ended for these 2 players. There are 3 rounds of combat fought each time, unless any player announces a retreat between the rounds. Neither the Minmatar nor the Amarr player is willing to retreat from that central position, so they reassign any ships back into orbits and begin a second round of combat. After the 3rd round of combat, the Amarr Empire player is left with a single solitary malediction. The Minmatar player still has his Sleipnir, his Saber, and his Stiletto. Now, small ships are worth a strength of 1, medium ships are worth a strength of 3. Therefore, the Minmatar player has a total strength of 5 remaining in his fleet. The Amarr Empire player only has a strength of 1. This means the Minmatar player has successfully won this fight, returns all of his ships back into the system. He still controls that. The Amarr Empire player must now retreat. This means he has to move to a nearby system that contains no enemy ships and is preferably held by him. So that malediction moves right back where it came from, and the Minmatar player emerges from that combat triumphant. Combat can also earn other rewards. If the attacker wins the fight, he'll earn a victory point. If the defender wins a fight, he'll draw an event card. So in this case, because the Minmatar player has won that fight, he draws a new event card from the event deck. In addition to this, for every 3 strength worth of ships that have been destroyed, each player, attacker or defender, draws a number of event cards for every 3 strength lost. The Minmatar player lost a Vagabond, which is worth 3 strength, thus he draws a second event card. The Amarr player, having lost both his Zealot and his Curse, for a total of 6 strength, draws 2 event cards, which he adds to his collection to use in future turns. Then there's the subject of player count. Now, Eve War for New Eden is labelled as 2 to 4 players. I don't know if there'll be other modes available when the Kickstarter completes, but that's what I had access to. And some games you might find that it works better or worse at different player counts. Now with Eve War for New Eden, I found that 3-player is still a solid game, but it did have a few moments where the 3rd player, due to the nature of the board, feels a little bit penned up. That can be countered quite comfortably by them working more on industry or building up a larger fleet in order to power through the blockade into the central area, and that did make for some fantastic stories. But we found that the game really shines at 2 or 4 players. In a 2-player game, it is an absolute head-to-head duel. Both players are exploring their side of the board as quickly and efficiently as possible to try and build their empire, set down some stations and structures, and a massive fleet ready for when the battle lines are drawn down the center and this massive fight kicks off for who can control the central space. In a 4-player game, though, things get absolutely chaotic. You've got 4 people all scrambling for these limited systems and resources in-game, and you very quickly find that whoever takes the front ends up getting the ire of every other player. You take that central point like the Minmatar player has here, and everyone else starts amassing their own fleets to punch inwards. The danger of this as well is that no one really wants to make the first move because they know that they're going to fight for the central position and lose a lot of their ships in the process. Then the player next to them is going to jump in afterwards, and so you end up with this wonderful sense of diplomacy going around the table. There aren't any formal mechanics for alliances in War for New Eden, but they form anyway. Players will be discussing what's going on around the table, and often you'll get discussions like, oh, that Minmatar player's been in the center for a little bit of time, perhaps we should start either pushing him off or move around and claim some of his other systems. Or the Gallente player has 5 blasted customs offices down the board, and his ISK income is absolutely ridiculous right now, but some of it's undefended. Maybe we could sneak around the back and claim some of those. And this also brings me to a mechanic I haven't mentioned so far in this video, called a raid. If you can bring one of your fleets into enemy territory and onto their home system, you can actually steal victory points from them, off their board onto yours. And this is brutal, especially if you're making that push for the center and you've left your rear lines undefended and other players are just coming in and raiding you. It's like the ESS mechanic in EVE Online, and I love that that's been represented in this as well. And this brings me really to my key and final point with War for New Eden. That if you are an EVE Online player, so many of the mechanics that you understand from the online game are here and present. You've got exploration, industry, manufacturing, of course, full-on fleet combat. But I've played it with enough non-EVE players, people who are completely unfamiliar with EVE Online's as the source material. And those people still have adored this game. They've come away feeling like they had all the information right in front of them in order to succeed in this. And in fact, only 2 of the players in our group actually play EVE Online at all, and other than me, neither of us have won a game. I've won 1. He hasn't won any. It's other board game players who have managed to take the win in this by examining the board and the information they have in front of them and taking the win from there. So if you're worried about picking this up and trying to play it with friends who maybe aren't familiar with EVE Online, don't be. This game is essentially fantastic even if you stripped away the EVE Online intellectual property from it. If these were different spaceships and different empires, it would still be an incredible space game. So at this point in the video, you're probably just waiting for a final verdict from me. First of all, I just want to give a huge shout out and thank you to both Chaos Cards here in Folkestone for letting me use their back room like this in order to give you a much better experience of what this game is about, and also to Titanforge themselves for supplying this absolutely beautiful prototype. If the finished game is just like this, I would be extraordinarily happy with it. But I can imagine that the ships are going to be even better quality, the cards will be even better quality than we see here, and that astonishes me. On that fact alone, I think this is going to be an absolutely wonderful product. And as for the game itself, well, I really couldn't find many faults in it at all. The issues that we had early on with the game, we very quickly learned to account for. I've already mentioned that in a 3-player game, one of the players does feel a little bit constrained and can be penned in. If you look at the board setup here, if you've got the Minmatar and Galente going up against the Caldari, and both the Galente and the Minmatar rush for the center, then the Caldari's only got a limited space to work with. But then they just refine their plan to accommodate that, and actually they can end up stealing the victory by a landslide because people are just not watching what's going on in the board. For a strategic game, this is just so versatile and wonderful. Every decision feels like it does have weight, but equally you don't feel like every decision absolutely must be played in a certain way in order for you to take the victory. There's a lot of rolling with the punches, which some games like this really don't have. Some of those bigger scale 4X games, not mentioning any names, can feel early on as if someone has taken massive advantage and then the whole table gangs up on them and they just lose, giving that kind of kingmaker feel. You don't really get that here, because if people start questioning your military might, you can just pivot to manufacturing or building structures and things like that in order to develop in different directions. You can start going for the mission cards in order to earn victory points that way. If you're struggling with the victory points from the missions, you can move into military. You can literally just straight up manufacture the victory points themselves. There are so many different paths to victory that there's just a whole plethora. Every game that we have played of this has felt completely unique and different. And it's rather like certain other games I've played that actually create a narrative. It's not just a board game. There is a story behind this as well, and we've come away from our games alive with these discussions of, oh, do you remember when this happened? Oh, couldn't I have done that better? It's also one of the only games of this type where we've finished a round of it after 2 or 3 hours, and then players have come back and said, actually, can we set up again and go again? Some of these other Space 4X games, I found that one of the difficulties with them is the sheer scope and weight of them makes them an intense gaming experience that lasts for sometimes days, and that can be prohibitive to getting it to a table. This, on the other hand, we've played multiple games in a row with it, which I think speaks volumes for the quality of this game and how quick and easy it can be to play. If you've got brand new players, if it's 1 player who knows the rules and 3 who don't, you're looking probably around 4 hours to take it to completion. Whereas once players understand what's going on, it can be completed easily within 2 to 3 hours, making it a much less prohibitive experience just to get it to a tabletop. If this wasn't EVE Online, I would still be absolutely enamored with this, and hopefully that gives you some clarity on whether or not this is something that you want to back. And if you do, well, I look forward to seeing you in the future. I'm going to be covering this as the game launches as well. I'll be probably sitting there and painting some of these up. I used to work for Games Workshop, doing little painting tutorials and things like that. I think will be a lot of fun to actually get a copy of this and paint all of the models in their actual EVE Online color schemes. This has inspired me. If you are a board gamer and you're liking the look of this and you don't know much about EVE Online and you want to get involved in EVE Online, I've got a YouTube channel for that, designed to teach you everything you need to know about this amazing online game. On the other hand, if you know me through EVE Online already and you're now interested in the world of board games, well, I've just set up a new YouTube purely to talk about board games, some old ones, some new ones, my personal favourites, and I'm going to be covering those on that channel too, so I'd love to see you there to discuss more about this exceptional hobby. I'm really excited to hear what you guys think of this game. I'm in love with it, my gaming group is absolutely in love with it as well. I can't wait to hear from you all how you feel about this too. If you do have any questions as well, ask down below. I'll answer all the ones that I can do. Otherwise, thank you for watching right the way through to the end on this one. Happy sailing, and see you all next time.